Well, hello, Rivergate. Pastor Chris bringing this morning's chat. And as always, I want to start it off with a little cyber hug. Oh, I miss you so much. Can't wait till we're all together and have those for real. Just a reminder to take advantage of the technology. So screenshot things, pause, rewind, check out links, send it to other people, all that kind of stuff. So last week we talked about the heart shift, getting our hearts ready for a new normal. And then, of course, this week we saw some new things in the news that restrictions are loosening up a little bit and even recommendations are loosening up a little bit. So I want you to stay posted to see how, as a leadership team, we are going to make some shifts and adjustments and changes to what we're doing here at Rivergate. So keep watching for that. But it also tells us that now is the time to make sure that our hearts are in that heart shift place, that we are ready to make the adjustments and to see the adjustments come to play and see how those start to work out. So if you haven't yet done those walk it out steps from last week, please go check those out again and take those walk it out steps. Get yourself ready so that you know that your priorities are the same as God's and that your heart knows what is kingdom versus what is just a form of church. All right, so we can embrace the kingdom and advance it and not just get lost in the mourning process of the things that were near and dear to our hearts. So I did ask the Father, hey, what do you want me to share on this week? What's on your heart for this week? Now, in a spirit of transparency, I asked my daughter Rhea that question first. I know I should have asked God first, but I was just sitting around the kitchen table and I said, hey, what should I speak on? And she shot out really quickly, leadership. I said, wow, okay, all right. So I started doing some research on that and started looking into some details on that. And I've got some really cool things coming up. But as I was going through it, I just felt that nudging from the Holy Spirit. Hey, I've got something else. I said, okay. So I asked the Father, what do you want me to share on this week? He spoke very clearly, very calmly, but very loudly. Trust. I want my children to become what they believe. For that, they need trust. So, from that moment comes today's message. Trust. From believing to becoming. So let's take some time to get our heads into this topic for a little bit. I want to soak our brains in it. So I want to check out a few of these trust quotes with me. Love all, trust a few, do wrong to none, William Shakespeare. I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on, I can't believe you. Friedrich Nietzsche. All the world is made of faith and trust and pixie dust, J.M. Barrie, Peter Pan. I don't trust people who don't love themselves and then tell me, I love you. There is an African saying which is, be careful when a naked person offers you a shirt. Maya Angelou. The best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them. Ernest Hemingway. Now those are very powerful. I want you to listen to these last two. They really strike a chord for me, especially with regards to where I believe the Lord took me with this topic today. Have enough courage to trust love one more time, and always one more time. Maya Angelou. Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Corrie ten Boom. If you Google this, you're going to find tons of quotes on the idea of trust. You're going to see things that range from cynical all the way through to inspiring. You're going to hear about people's pain. You're going to hear nuggets of wisdom. And now what I want us to do is I want us to turn and take a look at some scriptures. And we're not going to do, I've got a bunch of scriptures. I'm going to read them out to us. And we're not going to go in depth onto all of them. We're just going to read them. We're kind of washing over our souls. Sometimes you've heard me refer to this as a word wash, where we just literally let the word of God just wash over our souls and fill in the cracks in our hearts. All right, and around this topic of trust. So that's where we're going to go. Jeremiah 17, 7-8. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Psalm 56, 3. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. Psalm 143, 8. Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. Psalm 91, 1 and 2. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Now, this last verse I want to share with you. I've got it in two versions. You're going to see that come up on the screen, but I'm sharing it because this is one that I want us to focus on a little bit, and it has some definitions hidden inside here that are going to be important for the rest of our conversation. 1 Timothy 4:10. For the sake of this ministry, we toil tirelessly and are criticized continually, simply because our hope, our trust, is in the living God. He is the wonderful life giver of all the children of men, and even more so to those who believe. So here's why I chose that one. If you notice in there, the word trust and the word believe are both included in this scripture. So I want to do a little word study with you, and I like to do these. Going back to original languages often helps us to get a fuller understanding of what was being said during that time. Our modern language doesn't always reflect accurately what was being said when those words were penned in the ancient languages. So let's take a look at the Greek words for both trust and believe. If you notice the word trust there, elpizo, is different than the word believe, which is pisto. Now, in the word trust, you see the words there, hope, hoping for, expecting, trusting, to actively be waiting for God's fulfillment. It's about a faith that has a specific focal point. It's faith that has gone from the place of an undefined, ethereal, kind of omnifocus, and faith has been now applied specifically and directed towards something individual. There's something intimate about this level of trust that's a little different than just believing. Both are important. Don't get me wrong on that. Both are very important. They're critical to who we are as God's children, but both are critical, and they're not the same thing. So if you look over at the believe word, this is where the general word for faith comes from, and to. This is a verb form in there, but it means to make trustworthy, to establish, to be convinced, to give an assurance, to be assured of something, and even to persuade. So for the word believe, we have this sense that there's about being persuaded in our mind, being assured of something. It is foundational. It's not absent from the heart, but a lot of it has to do with the way we're thinking and what we've been persuaded, convinced, and assured of. And then when we see this compared to the word trust, we hear that trust then takes this and makes it personal. Trust, we can say, I believe in you. Do I trust you, right? There's a different nuance to those. And that nuance was not lost in the original language. That nuance is built into the original language here. The difference between these words may be subtle, but it is crucial. Trust is what happens when we drag the truth from our head into our heart. When we transfer the truth that has persuaded our thinking into a relational trust between us and God, we begin to become what we believe. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where faith starts to invade reality. It's through the exercise of that relational trust. And it's not just about our relationship with God. Trust impacts everything, every relationship. Our trust in our own selves. Do we trust ourselves? Our trust in others. And the way other people perceive us as far as trust levels go. Are we trusted people? All right, so for example, God is proof that you can be both trustworthy and yet still not trusted. There's a bunch of people on this planet that aren't trusting God, right? But we know that he is trustworthy. For some of us, we've spent a lot of time thinking about the things that God says that we are. And we've heard it repeated time and time again. We've read them over and over again. We've spoken them out loud, and we do believe them. We've told our minds, this is truth, and you will adopt it as so. You will treat it as such. But yet there's a degree to which, for many of these aspects of who we are, many of these things that God speaks and tells us that we are and that we're capable of, there's a degree to which we haven't yet received them. And that's kind of this journey that I'm talking about, that we've believed them here, but we haven't yet received it. It hasn't made that 16-inch journey, right, down from our head into our heart, where it's really become a part of who we are, and then becomes a part of framing who we are and how we're going to function. In other words, we haven't accepted those truths into our core, right? Those truths they've got to work down into our core. And when they work into our core, then that's when they become change agents to transform us on the inside, so that we actually are living the promises that we found listed inside of those beliefs. Okay, so I'm going to use an example, an illustration for you about this, and it is a little bit nerdy, so bear with me. It's about the chemical catalysts. Okay, chemical catalysts. And I sometimes will use these natural kinds of principles and illustrations to make a point. And I don't be scared. It's not going to be so in-depth that you're going to feel like you're going to school again. But I hope you're going to see the power behind this and see the parallel as I get to the end there. So let's talk about catalysts. And it has lots of different applications. You've probably heard the word catalyst before. And if you've been in business, the business world, we hear that said a lot. We talk about being a catalyst for change and things like that. And we know what that means. We have kind of an idea what that means. But there is something very powerful about the specifics of that I want to draw our attention to. So officially speaking, catalyst is a substance that speeds up a chemical reaction, but is not consumed by the reaction. So therefore, a catalyst, the catalyst substance itself, can be recovered chemically, unchanged by the process that it was used to create or speed up. All right, so I hope that makes sense to you. For example, you can take hydrogen peroxide and you can add a little bit of yeast to that. And yeast will act as a catalyst in that moment. And the yeast starts to break down the hydrogen peroxide and divide some of those molecules. And what you end up getting is water and oxygen. All right, so water and oxygen are both combined and make hydrogen peroxide, and you can extract those again from one another, and yeast can do that. Now, in the process of that, you get drinking water and you get breathable oxygen. You really can't drink hydrogen peroxide effectively, not as a way of hydrating yourself, right? You can take it medicinally and stuff like that, but you're not going to hydrate yourself with it. And oxygen, right? That you can't breathe in hydrogen peroxide and think you're going to be able to survive, and your lungs are going to be able to handle that. But when a catalyst is introduced, what we see happening then is oxygen and water are separated again from the hydrogen peroxide, and each one now individually is accessible, and the yeast is still independent of those. All right, so, and this whole thing also can be done in reverse as well. That's important to know too, that you can catalyze something to bring them apart, and you can also introduce a catalyst that brings things together. So what am I saying about this? What I'm saying is, and maybe you see it already, but this is what the Father wants for us, is that there are kingdom catalysts, there are supernatural catalysts, spiritual things that can be introduced to us that create change, and they are distinct in themselves, but they create change. Sometimes they extract things that aren't supposed to be together and extract them to make them separate. Sometimes they combine things to bring them together and to make two things that shouldn't be separate one, so that they work well together. And that's what the Father wants for us. See, truth gets poured into our hearts, our minds, our souls, and from all different sources, right? It's all roots back to God, but sometimes we're reading His Word, the Bible, and we're getting a nugget of truth. Sometimes we're listening to someone talk. Sometimes we're just out looking at nature and we're observing the world around us. At other times, maybe we've heard an actual word from the voice of God Himself in the Spirit, a prophetic utterance. It could be angelic. Right? There are so many options that God uses, so many different ways God uses to get truth into us. All right? But even if we see it, hear it, and are taught it and discover it, even if we dream it, right? We can have dreams about it. But when our faith gets introduced to that mix, it creates a catalytic conversion. See, truth alone, just being exposed to that truth, isn't enough to bring the transformation. Jesus said very plainly, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Not that you would be told the truth, and the truth would force you into a place of freedom. He said you would know it. And that word know, ginosko, means you'll experience the fullness of the truth. You'll not only hear it, it'll get into your mind, but you become intimate with it. And through that intimacy, it forces you into a place of freedom. And that's the key difference, right? So we can be introduced. We see all throughout the scriptures where people were introduced with truth that they then rejected. They were told truth. Truth went into their heads, but it went flying back out before it could make it down into the heart to a place of transformation. And what God wants for us is that he wants faith to mingle with this truth and become the catalyst for either unraveling something inside of us that doesn't need to be together, or for combining things that need to be combined so that we can walk more fully like Jesus. Does that make sense? So our faith is that catalyst. And faith gets introduced into the mix of those elements of truth and even our life experiences. And when it is done catalyzing and either combining or separating, whatever it's supposed to do in that moment, faith is still real. It's still its own thing, and it still exists, even kind of apart from those elements. So it can keep doing what it's supposed to do. It's a recycling resource, right? It's a regenerating resource. It just keeps on working to do what it's been called to do. So to summarize that, sometimes we need things that are part of us to be separated out so that we can see the pure truth transform us into the living water and pure air that we're supposed to be. And then at other times, we need different aspects of truth to take over our lives and become fully integrated. And faith does both of those things for us. All right, and then going back to look at our example, we're looking at the beakers and the chemical reactions. We could very well say that our hearts are the receiving beaker, that our heart is the place where the things already exist, and our faith gets poured in to our heart, that the truths and they get poured into our heart, and that's where the catalytic conversion happens for us. So now let's be clear about what that means from a spiritual aspect, from a soul aspect for us. Truth gets poured into us from all manner of places. We see it, hear it, are taught it, discover it, even dream it. Then our faith gets added to the mix, and it creates a catalytic conversion. Things that aren't supposed to be entangled can get disentangled, and things that are supposed to be integrated can become integrated. Right? In our heart, the chemical reactions where that happens, and it begins to change us and to transform us. The truths deposited in our head make it down and come alive more fully in our hearts. And then when that happens, a faith that was rooted in a belief system that stayed in our intellect becomes a trust that is now rooted in our hearts, that becomes a relational connection between us and God, us to ourselves, others to us, us to others. Trust begins to take over, and that's where real transformation begins to happen. In other words, Jesus can tell you that you can be born again and receive freedom and have a new life and have a new way of thinking and feeling and being and new power and access. He can tell you those things, and you could even say, yeah, I believe that. But do you trust him to make that a reality? And do you trust him to make that a reality in light of all the different experiences you're having, in light of all the different challenges that you might go through that would seem to scream against that truth? When you can trust him on that level, that's where the transformation really begins to take place. That's the place of change. That's the place. And when our faith invades our hearts to such a degree that it's happening on this molecular level, that's when we're going to see the kind of change that makes the world around us become like the kingdom that's placed inside of us. I'm going to share another biblical example of this happening in someone's life, in Peter's life. It's from Matthew 14, 22 to 33, and it's that time where he's walking on the water. All right, so we recognize that Peter, they're in the boat, and things are getting a little crazy, and they look out and they see Jesus walking on the water to them. And the shock, the amazement, the wonder of it all, it's incredible. In that moment, Peter has a truth dropped into him, and the truth is this: Peter, you too can walk on the water. If that's you, Lord, bid me to come out there to you. Peter's putting it out there. He's challenging Jesus a little bit on this. He wants this experience. He doesn't want to just be observing. He wants to be in the mix of the miraculous, right? We all would love that, right? We all love those moments when we're in the mix of the miraculous. So the truth gets dropped in his head. All right, come on out. So he's got the word from the Lord, come on out. In that moment, of course, just before that, he says, tell me, Jesus, if you tell me, I believe I'll be able to come out to you if you tell me to do it. So the belief is there. So Peter then takes a step of faith. Boom, he walks out on the water and begins to walk. Well, what happens? The circumstances of his life, the things going on around him, begin to scream at him a threat, scream at him danger, scream at him that what you're doing is irrational, doesn't make any sense. You're breaking the laws of nature. This doesn't. And as the world around him begins to shout and scream, what happens? His eyes go off of Jesus and that relationship. He loses his connection to Jesus, just even visually. Obviously, his heart begins to disconnect because what happens? He starts trusting the challenges he sees around him more than he trusted the truth that came from Jesus that brought him out on the water in the first place. All right? And that's the way it works for us. It's no different for us. It might not be the moment of walking on the water for us. It might be a totally different scenario. But when God has given us a promise or an instruction or something, and we trust him and we step out, and then the world around us begins to rage against what that promise was telling us could happen. It rages against the fruit and the vision of that promise. We have a choice to make. Will we trust what we see happening around here, or are we going to go after it with God? Are we going to keep digging in? Are we going to keep that connection with him and let our trust in him override the tribulation and the trial and the challenges we see facing us in our immediate circumstances? All right? And Peter did that. And although Peter, we'll say that we know that story, right? So Peter begins to sink, but what happens? He restores himself back in connection to Jesus. He looks up and he says, Master. Like he's looking up at Jesus and recognizing, whoa, I need that. He's my lifeline. He's my lifeline. I stepped out on here not because of the water, not because I felt I was stronger than the waves. I stepped out on here because my relationship with Jesus was such that I knew I could be okay. I knew I could do this with him. And I have to restore that. And that's what Jesus lifts him up and picks him back up. When I choose to trust that my weaknesses are more influential than God's grace, I become a lesser version of myself. When I choose to trust that the enemy's curses are more powerful and his tactics are more powerful than my Father's promises and my Father's grace, I become a lesser version of myself. I may still believe the truth, but I've stopped relationally trusting the truth. I've broken connection with the relationship that makes that truth a reality in my life. The more I struggle with trusting God, myself, trusting others, the more I make fear my master. And if fear is my master, love cannot be my master. When fear is my master, love loses its place of influence in my life, and I become a lesser version of myself. I can become secretive, manipulative, self-sabotaging, and self-medicating. Fear hijacks my faith, diverts it, misappropriates it, and begins to use it to focus on the elements of destruction. And unfortunately, faith, misused for fear, is still a catalyst. And it binds my beliefs. It binds my beliefs to an inferior reality, an inferior experience, one that God didn't intend. Or it extracts powerful truths and separates them within my heart so that I'm not able to wrap around them fully or see them integrated into my life. And in that way, I cannot become what I believe, but I become an inferior version of myself, a lesser version of myself. So, how do we grow our trust? Well, in typical guy fashion, I'm going to give you 3 easy steps. No, they're not easy, okay? But they are simple, and there are 3 steps. Step 1, assess our current condition. How much trust is there in our hearts for God, for ourselves, for others? There are things we do or don't do that tell us our trust level. Brené Brown is an author of several books and has one of the most popular TED Talks of all time, and it's on the subject of vulnerability. She's created a short assessment you can actually take online. It gives you a sense for how much trust is in your life. I'm going to put that up on the screen later so you can make note of it and check it out later. But so step 1 was assess your current condition. Where am I at with my trust level right now? And the second step is that once you have a sense of where you're at, you have to start making some changes. So you ask yourself this question: well, if my trust for God or myself or others were to increase, how would that affect these areas? My inner narrative, right? That's the conversations that we have in our heads, our self-talk. How would it affect my feelings? And how would it affect the way I act when challenging things are happening or I'm having a conflict with someone? In other words, like a stressful situation. If my trust level went to a new place, if I upgraded my trust level, how would that affect and change my life, change the way I think, feel, and act? And then the last step is put last on purpose because, quite honestly, until you've assessed this and at least started asking yourself these questions, it's going to be hard to do number 3. So find someone you trust. Right? Here we are. Find someone you trust and then invite them into these steps with you, steps 1 and 2. Tell them that you've assessed your current condition and here's where you're at and here's how you struggle in trust, or here's how you do really good with it, but these areas are the areas you need the upgrade. Tell them about that. And then also share with them, here's how I think it would start to affect. I think I'd be saying less and less of this in my head. I'd have fewer arguments with other people in my head, or I would be condemning myself less in my head. My feelings would change. I'd be happier. I'd be more content. I'd have more enthusiasm and hope. And then how would I act differently? Well, I wouldn't be so defensive, or I might not do some of these self-medicating behaviors, whatever that is. Find someone you trust, invite them into the steps, and then be willing to let them hold you accountable to being honest for this. And they need to hold you accountable for your progress in it. Our trust in God is very closely linked to our ability to trust ourselves even and to trust others. Right? So even at times when we realize that there's going to be some pain in the mix, that people will hurt us and we're going to hurt others. Right? Life is messy that way. It happens. But trust is a non-negotiable for the kingdom. So let's walk this thing out. How do we walk this out? What are the things? Well, honestly, I'm going to kind of be repeating the 3 steps that I just mentioned a minute ago, all right, just in another way. So do a trust assessment. How hard is it for me to trust people? How hard is it for me to trust myself? How hard is it for me to trust God? And then number 2, how will an upgrade in trust change my head talk, change my feelings, and change my behavior during times of stress especially? And then that last one, who am I going to trust to help me with this process and hold me accountable to being honest and truthful in it? And then, of course, to progressing and growing in it as well. Who will I let in on my steps 1 and 2? Okay, well, that's it for me. I want to encourage you, as always, there's a closing prayer. And those folks, man, there's a special presence and anointing in that. So take advantage of that. Let the prayer of that wash over you and fill you and prepare you to kind of launch out into this time of increasing and growing in your trust. And I look forward to seeing you face to face, as soon as possible. Love you so much. Have a great day.